Happy Women's Equality Day. Carry it on, as our sister suffragettes often said. So we're here today with Carol Wells from the Center for Political Graphics, and it's an honor to be able to introduce her. She's an activist, an historian, an art historian, a curator, a lecturer, and a writer. She's been collecting posters and producing political art exhibitions since 1981. She trained as a medievalist at UCLA, and she taught history of art and architecture for 13 years at Cal State Fullerton. In 1988, she founded the Center for the Study of Political Graphics, an educational and research archive that collects and documents, preserves, and exhibits posters relating to diverse movements for social change. The CSPG currently holds 90,000 posters, including the largest collection of post-World War II human rights and protest posters in the United States. Wells believes that the power of graphics can combat public apathy and feelings of helplessness, help open up a truly democratic arena for political debate, and inspire people to action. I'm proud to say that she is a fellow in the Los Angeles Institute for the Humanities, and we welcome any suggestions for an alternative to the word fellow that would be more encompassing of all of the gender possibilities. Carol, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is, it's always great to have an opportunity to meet new people, even though we're not really meeting, but you'll certainly, you'll know me a lot better by the time the presentation is over. And just a little bit about, I'm very passionate about art, and I'm passionate about social change, and I've been working for social change really since high school. So it's basically the age that most of the listeners are right now, and so it's become a life's work for me to use the power of graphics to help educate and promote social change and to try to make the world a better place. So if that's the only lesson that people come out with today, I will be very happy. That's all of our obligation, to do the best we can to make the world a little better than we found it. Art is powerful. There's never been a movement for social change that has functioned in the last 100, 200 years that the arts haven't been central to that movement. You can't think of, the Russian Revolution without their posters, the Chinese Revolution, their posters, their theater, the Civil Rights Movement didn't make very many posters. They made some, but the music, we cannot even imagine the Civil Rights Movement without the music. We shall overcome, we shall not be moved. The Vietnam War period, of course, that was full of music and poetry and theater and film. Of course, film is extremely political. Even if you think it's just entertaining, there's always an underlying message, intentional or not. And the idea of intentionality is important because everything is political. Okay, every advertisement, every billboard, every abstract painting is political, but they're not all overtly political. And the Center for the Study of Political Graphics only collects overtly political material, so intentionality, and also only things that were made in a multiple. It's because when I founded it as to be a resource for activists. We don't know our own history. Our history is told by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or the LA Times, or the newspapers that certainly don't have necessarily a positive view of what we're doing. So if they cover our work at all, it's usually in a very dismissive way. There's a wonderful African proverb, don't know who said it, it's been around for a while, and it says, "Until the lions have their historians, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter." Now you've heard of histories written by the victors. Well, this is really turning it upside down. Until the lions have their historians, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter. And basically what the posters are, they're the lions' stories told by the lions, told by the activists, told by the people who are trying to make change. So it's one of my favorite quotes. I say it all the time. Now, the center has been collecting posters for, before there was a center. I've been collecting posters since 1981. And then in 1988, they literally got over, there was too many for me to keep putting them under the bed. And my daughter said, if I can't have ice cream, I'm going to write on your posters. So that was another impetus to move them out of the house. And so I started the center, and people started overwhelming me with the posters they had under their beds. And people started saying, can you do an exhibit on this, on that? And so pretty soon it became, you know, a full-time passion and a full-time commitment. And when I did we do a new exhibition every year, or we update an old one. And our exhibitions, CSBG curated exhibitions, have been over 400 places, mainly the United States, but also around the world. That's you know, an institution 10 times our size, that would be a big accomplishment. And I have done a number of women's exhibitions over the years. And when Amy asked me to do this presentation on our newest one, which is called Activists, Artists, and Sisters, Posters on Women Fighting for Justice, I said, oh, we've done about 4 or 5 or 6 women's exhibitions in the last 30 years. And then I went and checked, and we actually had done 15 of them. That's like every other year. They keep getting updated. The only other exhibition that had more than women was immigration. We did like 16 or 17 immigration exhibitions over the past 30 years. And the reason that those 2 areas have the most activity is because the laws around them they're constantly being challenged, they're constantly being changed, they affect all of our lives, and so these issues keep changing. Our last major women's exhibition was done around 2010, and the title of it then was Reclaiming the F Word, Posters on International Feminism. Because in 2010, feminism was still a dirty word. Most women didn't, you know, a lot of younger women didn't call themselves feminists. A lot of older women didn't call themselves feminists. I was teaching in the 90s, I was teaching at Cal State Fullerton, and one of the students took a survey for an anthropology class, and she took a survey of, she asked 50 women, do they call themselves feminists? And of the 50 women, only 1 or 2 said they did, and I was one of them. I was 50% of that. You wouldn't say that now, because now, since the Me Too movement and Time's Up movement, now the word feminism is back in, you know, in broad acceptance. So there had to be, you know, there had to be a new emphasis. So I thought that with this exhibition, which I'm about to start showing you now, we'll show you some of that new emphasis. I also want to tell you a little bit about the curating process. Before I start an exhibition, I like to have at least 300 posters. With the women's, it was easy. We have thousands, but we edit it down to 75, because 75 won't glaze you over too much, and then it gives enough to tell a narrative. So every exhibition that we do tells a narrative. We also check our website. There's about 12.5 exhibitions fully annotated on our website, politicalgraphics.org. And also, you were talking about bringing art into your classrooms. We just produced last week, it's not online yet, but it's a tutorial on how to use our posters for your classroom, and how students can use our posters to research their own projects, and they're about all kinds of issues. So that I will send Amy an email about when that's ready to launch. So I cannot be an expert on every exhibition. Our exhibitions cover a lot of issues. So every exhibition has a new curatorial team, and they're usually you know, activists, artists, and academics in the field. And this one was the same way. We had like 3 or 4 artists, we had a couple of anthropologists, we had a curator, and they were also from all over the world. It was, I would say, more than 50% of the curatorial team were women of color. So it was an extremely diverse, both in terms of age, experience, and basically training. So if we go to the very first poster, and what's one of the striking things that you'll see, so I think it's the, yes, the opening is the opening, yeah, so that's the title of the exhibition, and then our funders are on the top and our website's on the bottom. Okay, so our next poster. So the first 2 posters are really, they're 50 years apart. The one on the right was made in 1970, 71. The one on the left was made in 2017 for the Women's March that was in Washington the day after Trump's inauguration. And what's striking about a lot of the posters that I'll show you is that the issues are still issues. The posters that were done in the 60s and 70s are the same issues that are being done in today. And that's very sobering. It's for having made progress in certain areas, we've stayed still in many others. I like this one as the opening title on the left. This march started a long time ago, equality for all, because obviously it did. The Liberation School for Women is actually something I didn't know existed until I found this poster. And I think you'll be I don't know if you may know this already, but I didn't. The very first women's studies course at a university in the United States started in 1970 in San Diego. So that's certainly something to be proud of. The Liberation School for Women was actually set up to teach women things that they didn't typically learn in school. There's a line in their brochure that said in the United States, women are taught only the skills they need to, in fact, everybody, not just women, are only taught the skills they need to do the job that they're being trained to do. I know I'm probably the age of a lot of your grandparents, but when I was in middle school, we called it junior high school then, the guys all took shop and learned how to use a hammer and nails, and the girls all took home ec, and we learned how to sew. And what did we sew? I sewed an apron for cooking, and I sewed a baby jacket, assuming that, of course, I was going to have a baby and want to have a baby jacket that would have lasted 50 years before I had a baby. So, so this was kind of like how we were all trained to do certain things. And these posters with this poster on the right is advertising that there was a school out there that could teach people, how to repair things around the home, how to change a tire, how to do things that normally is considered, have the guy do it, get married, so the guy do it. This was to be training women so they could learn how to do it themselves. Next, please. These are both, this is a poster on the left is about, it's an indigenous woman from also 1970 made by the Akwesasne Notes, which was a Native American organization. And the one on the right is done in, very recently, it was done in, also 2017, it was done for the Women's March. And they're both dealing with stereotypes and racist attitudes towards indigenous women. On the left is a quote, but you can't read it, but it's by Buffy St. Marie. Why should an Indian woman have to bleach her hair to be accepted? And if you haven't heard of Buffy St. Marie, I really suggest you look her up. There's a fabulous documentary about her. And she was one of the first Native American superstars. She's still around. She lives in Hawaii. She's a singer, she's a songwriter, she's an activist. She had several of her songs were #1 hits. Some of her songs were recorded by Elvis Presley. This was a very extraordinary woman. She actually was the first Native American on Sesame Street and was the first person ever to breastfeed her child on Sesame Street. So her story is extraordinary. She got blacklisted first by President Johnson and then by President Nixon because of her activism. And her very, very outspoken against the Vietnam War. In fact, one of her songs called The Universal Soldier, you can see her singing it on YouTube. Basically, Johnson and then Nixon sent out, do not play her songs on the radio. And that almost killed her career, except that she kept writing and was very, very, prolific. The So Much More Than What Is Wrapped Around My Head is also aimed at the stereotypes of Middle Eastern women, as Muslim women who are wearing the hijab, the headdress. And there's so much discrimination against them in many countries, not just the United States. And yet we think of how many people in this country who are not Islamic also wear headdresses. Orthodox Jews wear headdresses. Nuns, when they used to wear the uniform, the habit, they had their hair covered. So it's also, there's more of an anti-Islamophobia aspect to this than this, straight, the just kind of the stereotypes that the headdress is something that's inappropriate for this country, because it certainly is not. Next two, please. Yeah, these are also two very interesting posters. So the first one that we're looking at now, they're both from the 1980s, and these are both talking about unpaid labor. That, you know, the labor that women do at home, cooking, cleaning, child rearing, chauffeuring, and it's, you know, historically it's been traditionally women. Men are doing a lot more now, but I think it's still, women are still doing 50%. And since COVID, the majority of that is still falling on women. And actually, I want to raise COVID for a second, probably raise it more than once. But when this exhibition was first done, and it was done this year. It was finished in March of this year. Every poster in it, even the ones from 2020, were all done before COVID. And so COVID was not a theme in this exhibition. But COVID has made every single theme in this exhibition worse. It exacerbated everything in this exhibition. So it's been a kind of a you know, frightening addendum to the exhibition, that even though COVID wasn't on our radar when the exhibition was first done, it certainly has become central to it now. So this one is made in London by the C-Red Women's Art Collective. And, you know, London was where the Industrial Revolution started, and so the whole background is a factory. But you see in this assembly line in the image, women are shown doing all this domestic work, caregiving, ironing, you know, so doing all that kind of, you know, the work in addition to having a job outside the home. There's the job inside the home. Then the next poster, thousands of miles away, same decade, also the 80s. This is from Tanzania, and this is primarily an agricultural farming background, and yet it's making the exact same claim. It's in Swahili. The translation is, "Night arrives, I'm exhausted. Still, I'm told that I'm not working. Is none of this work unless it is at the office?" And they're showing her, you know, with a child on the back, hoeing the land, gathering firewood. In fact, all the work she's doing with the child on the back, you know, ironing, bathing the children, you know, cooking the dinner. So all of this is again, the unpaid labor from an African woman's perspective. So I thought the other thing we try to do in all our exhibitions is not only show a time difference, like, you know, 40, 50 years between the same issues being dealt with in posters, but also from many, many different countries. There's clearly differences between the women's movement in the United States and women's movement in Africa or Central or South America, but there's also some areas of common ground at the same time. And so that's one of the things, one of the many areas that I like to raise with these exhibitions. Okay, the next one. Okay, so sexual harassment has been also around, I'm sure, forever. In fact, the stereotyped images that we see of the caveman dragging the woman by the hair, I mean, we have no documentation that ever existed, but that's been like the message that we have been getting for ever since people started making images of what they thought cavemen did and how the women were treated. One of the earliest and horrific examples of sexual harassment, of course, is the time of slavery and how the slave masters would regularly rape, you know, the slave women. So that was clearly, you know, I mean, sexual harassment that's off the scale, total, you know, violence and rape. But it didn't really become a common term. The term sexual harassment reached like household level of understanding and familiarity during the Anita Hill testimonies in 1991. Now we saw a little bit of, we actually got a deja vu aspect of that with the Brett Kavanaugh hearings for the Supreme Court. And when, you know, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was testifying against him, and not that long ago. It was certainly very, very familiar in all of our memories. And yet a very similar event took place in 1991 when Clarence Thomas was nominated to the Supreme Court, And Anita Hill, who worked with him, testified against him and claimed repeated examples of sexual harassment. And so all of a sudden you start seeing many posters coming up about sexual harassment. You started seeing conversations about sexual harassment. People really started understanding that. Now this was, I had some personal experience, a lot of personal experience, but one of the faculty I taught with in Fullerton, I taught from 1980 to 1992. The Anita Hill thing was 1991, so really at the end. And one of the faculty was always telling dirty jokes to try to make me lose my cool. And I didn't know that that was sexual harassment. I didn't know that I could have complained about it until after all the stuff with Anita Hill. It was just like, that's how guys treat girls. I mean, that was like life. That was just like, okay. So I learned how to keep a straight face and not respond. It's like, oh, please, act like there was no big deal. And inside I was seething. And it wasn't until those hearings that I really understood I had a voice. I could have told them to shut up, but I didn't think of it. I didn't know it. As much political organizing I had done, sexual harassment was still something, there's always stuff to learn. There's always stuff you can learn. These 5 white men that are, that was Ask Any Woman About Sexual Harassment, they're people that you really, most of you don't know. The second from the right is Ronald Reagan. So that one you've heard of. The 3 on the left are all members of his government. Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and then on the guy on the far right is the writer Norman Mailer. So he was politically liberal, but he was also extremely sexist. So there's those kinds of distinctions are, we have to challenge them whenever we can. Okay, next one. This is a relatively new campaign. It started in, this is from 2012, so it's certainly newer than the other one. And it's by a woman named Tatiana Fazlazadeh. And she had a campaign in New York with all these images of women with slogans that the women told them men, when they walked down the streets, would tell them. And some men think that you're giving a woman a compliment when you wolf whistle her, when but it's really not. And it makes women very uncomfortable. It's like impeding on their space. It's actually kind of be seen as very threatening. And when I saw this one, Stop Telling Women to Smile, I really responded to that because men, mainly, I would say 99% of the people, have told me, oh, you'd be so much prettier if you smile. Why don't you smile? Life can't be that bad. The day can't be that bad. People are always telling me, smile. And I always got uptight. And I didn't know why I got uptight. And then seeing this poster, oh, that's why. It's all part of this sexual harassment, having these people who don't know me, who know nothing about me, although that's not true totally. Sometimes people I do know have also said that. And it's not their business. They don't know what my day's been like. Why should I smile? And smiling can also be taken as a come on. And so that can also have ramifications. So posters have the ability to break through the bubble that we have around us every day just to get through the day. We know what we have to do to get through the day, and we kind of just like protect ourselves from being bombarded by all the other distractions, and some of them are threats. But this is posters really have the ability to cut through, and I think that's really quite part of their power. Next. Yeah, this is a very sobering poster. Again, it's a statistic that I don't think many people are aware of because people tend to, they'll deal with homelessness as one set of problems and issues, and domestic violence as another set of problems and issues, without ever linking them together, that they're often cause and effect. And this poster says up to 50% of all homeless women and children in this country are fleeing domestic violence. So this is a real, it's really cutting up, it's connecting with 2 very, very serious and very really epidemic. They're both domestic violence and homelessness are epidemics. We're not just dealing with the epidemic of COVID-19, but of domestic violence and homelessness and police abuse. I mean, and climate change. We've got a whole lot of, you know, your generation, I'm afraid, has a whole lot worse problems on their plate than in a shorter time frame than I ever thought certainly possible when I was your age. And COVID has made this worse because of COVID, people, the women and the children who are at home with their abusers can't leave so easily. They don't have private time to call up a hotline because they're all there in the same room, apartment, or house together. It's dangerous to go to a shelter because you can't social distance in a shelter. So there's all of these additional levels of problems that are caused by COVID. Teachers were one of the main ways that domestic violence was reported. You know, child abuse was reported by the teachers in the classroom, seeing either the kids were not coming to school for a lot, or they were bruised and without logical explanation. And with the schools being closed, that you know, way into seeing the problem was also not as readily available. So it's really, really, you know, as I said, a huge issue. And the reporting, the domestic violence shelters are reporting that the calls are way down because people don't have the freedom to make the calls because they're in the same space all the time. Used to, at least they could go shopping or something, or take the kids to school and have a little time that they were not under the control, the immediate eye and ear of their abuser. So this is a huge problem that's been exacerbated. Okay, next. And this is certainly not a problem. This is a problem with all countries. I don't care how developed they are, how high tech they are, or how agrarian they are. It's literally, domestic violence is a problem all over the world. This is a particularly gorgeous poster, which is why I put it up here. But it's also from the 70s. It's very early, and it's from Sri Lanka. And it's showing that women, you know, all over are organizing to protect themselves, you know, and to protect each other. The next poster, this one is dealing with date rape. Date rape is, you know, also a huge problem in the United States and most countries. I think, you know, the phone numbers on there are not. This is a fairly old poster. It was done in the 90s. So the phone numbers on there are not up to date. So I put the contemporary number that works right now, 24/7, on there. So if anybody needs that number, it's available. And it's, again, women and girls are really, it's a very frightening thing. And there's a lot of guys that are organizing against this. There are a lot of, you know, a lot of young men and men that are really helping to educate each other about this, and to, you know, that no means no, but it's still a huge, again, a huge problem. Okay, the next, please. This is an anti-bullying poster. It was done 2002. Actually, I should have been telling you all of the names of all the artists. I apologize for leaving that out, but I can certainly, the full exhibition, I'm only showing you 20 posters out of a 75-piece exhibition, and the full exhibition is available with all the information, the names, the dates, you know, what the medium, silkscreen, offset, and where they're from. So that's all available on through our website, politicalgraphics.org. So this is about bullying, but it's also about teen suicide. And that 35% posters, 35% of all teens that attempt suicide identify as LGBTQ. And obviously the bullying is a big part of this. They're not made to feel they belong. They're made to feel as an outsider. They're made to feel just both unsafe, unwanted, and so there's a lot, you know, another epidemic of teen suicide rates. So change starts with you. And I think the cut here really has a double meaning. It's a reference to suicide, but it's also a reference to cutting when people are, involved in self-hatred and punishment. There's a lot of cutting. And I know when my daughter was in high school, she had me read The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which was just an extremely powerful book. And it was really the first time I had ever even understood that how that's a problem on the level that it is. Next, please. So this next section is on reproductive rights. The poster on the left was made in 1971, before abortion was legal, before the Supreme Court voted on to legalize abortion through the Roe v. Wade. And then the poster on the right was made in the 1980s. So abortion is still legal, and yet it's still controversial. The debate on abortion is as loud as it was 40 to 50 years ago. The access to abortion actually is way less than it was in the early days of legalization. And I think that's it's one of the most difficult conversations around today, because there's very little wiggle room. The main wiggle room on the abortion issue, I think, is access to contraceptives, because the more contraceptive access there is, the less abortion is an issue. The more sex education there is in the school, the less abortion is an issue. But there's also a fight against that. There's a fight against having sex education in the school. So, it's and the way the country is divided now, it's only going to get, certainly there's no compromise or conversation even that I can see in the near future. But I want to talk about these a little bit. So the one on the left was before it was legal. The coat hanger was a very, very common symbol in the 60s and the 70s when abortion was illegal, because that was how many women got an illegal abortion, and often doing it themselves. They used a coat hanger. And so the image of a coat hanger immediately resonated with illegal abortion. Since it's been legalized, and there are safe alternatives, people are less familiar with the symbol of the coat hanger. And yet it's becoming harder and harder to get. More and more states are restricting, they're closing the clinics down, they're making it harder to get there. You have to have a waiting period, which is very cynical, because the longer you wait, the harder, the more dangerous it is. And then some places won't do them after a certain length of time. Back alley refers to an illegal abortion, which was dangerous. They were scary. My mother had an illegal abortion. I only found out about it on her deathbed, when she just didn't want to take it to her grave. And it was a nightmare. It was literally, my father couldn't go in. He had to wait outside in the car, and she went up to this place. And my mother was like a clean freak, really a clean freak. And this place was dirty. And fortunately, she didn't get an infection. Fortunately, she was fine. But that she lived with this her whole life, most of her life. She already had 3 children. And my dad was having, his job was very insecure at that point, and they felt they couldn't afford it. But it was illegal. So it's not as, a lot of women that you don't even suspect certainly have had abortions. Next two. So the one on the left, Becky Bell was 17 years old. She lived in a state that required parental consent. She did not, so abortion was legal, but she needed to have parental consent. She did not want, this was Indiana, she did not want to tell her parents, so she had an illegal abortion, and she died. So denying access is extremely, it results in a lot of people either becoming sterilized or death. The poster on the right is actually from LA, and it's a relatively recent one. The one Becky Bell one is from 1989, but this one is from 2018, the Stop Fake Clinics. Fake clinics are literally what they say. They pretend to be abortion or not providers. They pretend to be reproductive clinics. They give you advice, healthcare, that they will give you free services. They will tell you how far along you are. They will give you advice. They're not medical services. They are literally fake clinics. They put themselves in front of, excuse me, primarily outside of high schools in low-income communities, and they attract, teenage girls, and they delay, and they give fake information. They lie, they delay until it's too late. And yet there are over 4,000 fake clinics in the United States, almost more than double the amount of places that actually do abortions that are legal and safe. And so this is and this particular, because they're primarily aimed at girls of color, there's an organization in LA called Black Women for Wellness, and they have really been major promoters of the Stop Fake Clinic campaign. They've been buying, billboards. In fact, this was actually a very large billboard that they had in throughout LA and other places. So this is again one of the many tactics being used to get fake information out there and to prevent sex education and other aspects of being able to control your own body. Okay, next please. So women in war, women have been victims of war on many levels throughout history. Their husbands, their children, their families. I mean, obviously it's been primarily men who have fought the wars until relatively recently. I would say what women did fight in wars in, also, but they're stereotypically and traditionally it's the men who fight the wars, but the women are the victims. Women have traditionally been looked upon as prizes of war. So raping women is not only the gift to the soldiers, or for being real heroes, then you deserve to rape the women. But it's also a form of genocide. It's a form of terrorism. It's a way of terrorizing a population that if you don't win, your women will be raped. And so it has functions on so many different levels. This particular poster is about rape as a weapon of war in Darfur. And rape is a crime against humanity, no matter where it is, no matter who's doing it. It's a crime against humanity. And since 2003, tens of thousands of women and girls have been subject to sexual violence as a deliberate means of humiliation, as a deliberate means of degradation. The Sudanese government, the Sudanese military, the militia, police, all have been, involved in this. And it's not just, okay, this poster is about Sudan, but every army rapes. And the frightening thing, and I'm just going to talk about the US military, because there's also an epidemic of rape of women in the US military by their peers and their commanding officers. So, and you cannot report it. I mean, you can report it. You get harassed. You don't get promoted. You get ostracized. And so the rape of, and some men are getting raped also in the military by other military. In fact, they just found, there's just something in the news today about a man who's been missing for a while. And they just found a body of a woman who'd been missing, a soldier. And there's such a a culture of violence. And I mean, if you've listened to some of those, oh, don't be a girl, you know, don't, and even the chants that they use for the marching, they're very misogynistic. And so it's a real problem of you know, the U.S. military. So we're not just talking about foreign armies in another country dealing with their sexual predators, but we have the U.S. Army is, unfortunately, has the same problem. The last section is next. So this section is called Organizing for Justice, and this poster is from India, and it's just a wonderful poster. The hand is up, like, you know, stop. A lot of times you see the fist, but this is stop, and the translate is if women do not stand up, then the oppression against them will, if women do not stand up, then the oppression against them will increase, or the crime against them will increase. And this is about 2013, and it was used by a number of different organizations. That next poster. The indigenous women have been disappearing in Canada and the United States and Australia and wherever, you know, wherever indigenous women are, they've been victimized on a horrible level. You know, I'm overusing the word epidemic, I feel, but it's all an epidemic. The text on this says homicide is the third leading cause of death among indigenous women in the United States, between women between 10 and 24 years of age. That's an astounding statistic, astounding. And this is from the US Centers for Disease Control, you know. So this is, you know, in Canada, they also have organizations that are trying to deal with No More Stolen Sisters. And this is and again, by organizing, by educating people, by organizing is certainly one of the primary ways of fighting back and preventing this. Next. Black Lives Matter, of course, we've been seeing this all over. The Black Lives Matter movement, I think it's really important to mention, it's 10 years old. And it started, you know, it started in LA, three activists started it in LA after Trayvon Martin it wasn't after he was killed, it was after the guy who killed him was acquitted. And that's what moved Patrisse Cullors and others to start Black Lives Matter. So they've been organizing and educating for 10 years now, but I think it only like exploded into national consciousness after George Floyd was killed for the world to see in that, what was it, 7 minutes, 36 seconds, something like that. And you know, movements don't happen overnight. Movements take work, they take education, they take organizing, and they take a lot of commitment and time. And what's interesting about this was put out by a union, SEIU, is that this was made actually for the Women's March of 2017. So it's Black Lives Matter, but it's the fist, but it's in the women's symbol. So that was, you know, linking clearly the issues, because it's mainly, you know, it's men and women, and it's that we have to fight for. And then the final poster is also a very early one. It's from 1970. And it's, the photograph was taken during the Vietnam War, and it was on the front page of the New York Times. And then an artist named Liliana Porter saw it and made it into this poster. And it says, this woman is Vietnamese, South African, Puerto Rican, Colombian, Black, Argentinian, my mother, my sister, you, I. So it's really talking about the universality of humanity, the universality of all women, and by extension, by all men, that we are all humans, And as humans, we all have an obligation to, as I said at the very beginning, to make the world a better place. And I hope there's some questions. Are there? Yes.
Yeah, I have one. So.
Okay, oh, yeah, I should pick Aiden and then Lucy. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
So I put it in the chat, but I don't know if you saw it. But so in our world of like social media and the internet, we're constantly getting fed new information, and a lot of times, like let's say when I'm going through my Instagram, I see a lot of people like posting, sharing these like, I guess, digital posters with these messages on them. And I'm just wondering if when people share things, when I guess they don't really fully understand it, or they just share it because it's I guess it looks good on them or something like that. Does that, I guess, tarnish or I guess make the general point of the argument like fade out? Sorry, I said it in a really weird way.
I'm going to try to rephrase it, and then you tell me if that's what you're trying to ask.
Yeah.
Okay. So were you asking that if a lot of people share it, does that dilute the message?
Well, that's one part of it, but I'm also trying to say is like having so many different, like, well, yeah, pretty much that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you look at how advertising works, they try to saturate a market by repeating the message over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So if you use that, and posters are not unlike advertising, except instead of getting you to buy something, which advertising wants, what a poster does is wants to challenge the way you're thinking. And so you look at the world a little differently, so you become more critical. So I don't think there's there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. So it really becomes our responsibility as consumers, and you're lucky you've got a great school that you can also ask a lot of your teachers to help guide you through the maze of information overload. Because there's a lot of awful websites. There's a lot of good information on the web. There's a lot of bad information on the web. And it's really upon us to really do a lot of fact checking. So I think that's part of the responsibility that we have in using the media, that we don't just accept what we're shown on the internet, but we actually check it out. I mean, I actually had an intern that was, and I don't remember what it was. I don't remember what it was. Oh, I remember vaguely. It was we were talking about some issue on some environmental issue. And so she did some research and she came up with this description of a poster. We were doing a poster of the week that we do. And it sounded like it was an advertisement from an oil company. Everything she wrote was like, this doesn't make any sense. This sounds like a PR piece for an oil company. So I looked up she says, well, I got it from here. So I looked up that website, and then I kind of just did some detective work. That website was an oil company mouthpiece. So it really becomes incumbent upon us to check out where and who the information is coming from. Because it all looks the same, but it doesn't all mean the same. And it certainly isn't all, the level of accuracy isn't the same. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And
our
then
next question is from Lucy.
First of all, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. It's been great hearing about your exhibit. And you mentioned that COVID has worsened a lot of the issues in this exhibit. Like, do you plan on doing an exhibit in the future that's solely based on COVID, or just like pulling posters that have been from this time? Like, how do you?
Well, we're getting a lot of COVID posters, certainly. But most of the COVID posters we're getting almost are like the like public service announcements: wear your mask, wear your mask. Where the fact that it's even controversial to wear a mask blows my mind. I mean, that should be like total common sense, but it's become a partisan issue. If you're a Democrat, you wear a mask, and if you're a Republican, you don't. I mean, that's till very recently. So most of the COVID, and then there's some really funny ones. They'll have like the Mona Lisa wearing a mask, or the Statue of Liberty wearing a mask. So I would say the majority of the COVID-related posters, and there are many of them. In fact, some of them there's free downloads. So you can actually download free posters off of our website about that. They're dealing with just the safety issue, but not dealing with how to challenge the issue of homelessness, or how to challenge the issue of domestic violence, or educate about it. So there's many of them out there. There's hundreds of them, but the majority of the posters we have, and we're collecting them. But the majority of the posters that we usually use and collect and use to tell stories are ones that are trying to raise people's consciousness about social issues. Wearing a mask definitely fits into that. But to have an exhibit only on masks, would be pretty boring, kind of glaze over. But we would definitely, in fact, we did, our exhibition last year was on healthcare as a human right. And it's about to go online very soon, but I'm going to add some masks, some COVID issues in that. And then, in fact, I can see adding, we have another exhibition called Masterpieces, called PEACES, and it's all using like, the Mona Lisa and the Pieta and all these very, very famous art pieces, but making them as a political statement. And so we'll put some of those COVID mask ones next time we do that exhibition. So we'll incorporate the COVID posters into that. But they're really, but the other thing about COVID that's really interesting, and I'm really glad you raised that, is that it's kind of stripped away the curtain. I don't know if you've ever seen Wizard of Oz, and the wizard is behind the curtain, and the dogs, don't pay attention to the guy behind the curtain. COVID has stripped away the curtain of all of the that have been hiding all of the problems in the United States, all of the problem with our healthcare system. COVID has shown that we really need universal healthcare. We don't have it. COVID has shown that, in that Black and brown people are more vulnerable and die more often than COVID. Is because of the poverty, the lack of nutrition, the lack of healthcare. They live in areas where there's more smog. Racism of environmental racism. So it has really shown all of the problems in the society that a lot of us have known there, but others have been able to just look the other way, and it's made it impossible to look the other way. So that has been a real, and of course, that coupled with the racism, it's really uncovered a lot of racism in the society that is being fought on the streets. So it's a very, we don't know how this is going. We don't know, but let's put this way, this is a very interesting times. But thank you for your question. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Now we have a question from Andrew.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, who do you think the main demographic of protesters who donate you posters are? And do you think you're missing out on certain issues or protests because you guys just don't receive donations from that demographic of people?
We actually, 90, and I'm throwing out a number, I don't know how true it is, but over 95% of our posters are from the left of the press spectrum, as you could imagine just from hearing me talk. But we do have right-wing posters, and we have very, very right-wing posters. And so we will accept any poster from any political perspective. So I don't think that we're not, obviously we get more from the left because most governments are seen as the right. And so most people who are protesting governments around the world, 40% of our collections international are So most governments around the world are seen as right-wing, and so most protesters therefore are left-wing. So most of the posters that are produced are to the left of on the left side of the spectrum. But we have white supremacist posters that actually have posters. We have graphics made by the FBI that are really right-wing. We have posters that were part of the COINTELPRO actions against the Black Panther Party and the American Indian movement in the 60s and 70s. We have, we have some more contemporary right-wing posters that are made by Tea Party artists now, in the last 10 years. So we certainly have, I won't say we have, it's not equal, certainly, but we certainly have right-wing stuff too. And the reason we collect that, it's important for people to see what's out there. It's important for people to see it's not just people out there organizing to fight hate, but there's also people using the power of the graphics to promote hate. And that's really an important lesson to understand. So yeah, anybody wants to send that to us, we'll take it.
Mason, do you have a question?
Yeah, my question was, I was wondering what aspects of like socialism you kind of agree with, because I'm kind of curious on the topic and I figured you kind of seem like the right person to ask about it.
Well, I call myself a socialist feminist, because socialism, as it's traditionally been described, doesn't deal with women's issues as I would want women's issues dealt with. I also don't think there's been a lot of countries that have taken some things that are really great, like socialism, healthcare for all would be a great step. We have certain socialist things in this country. The libraries are socialist. The fire department is socialist, okay, in the sense that the government pays for them and they serve all of the people. So I think socialism has gotten a really bad rap, and I think it's really when the people's needs are being met and the people have a voice in deciding how their resources get spent and defined. So I certainly don't have a knee-jerk reaction against socialism. I think the ideals of equality, equality and equity, but now we're adding things to that conversation that never were in the traditional socialist writings. We're now adding equity and inclusion, and so we're adding. There was always the ideal of equality, but equality without equity and inclusion. So I think right now, the generation now that are having these conversations have the ability to redefine socialism, redefine the world the way we want it, and not just the way it was done. It was defined in the past. I think we have more tools now. Each generation hopefully has more insight, more awareness to really redefine and make the stakes higher, make it higher, raise the bar.
So if I could jump in, we have a couple more questions. In the interest of time, we want to be cognizant of your time and everyone's time. And so we're going to end with one of these questions. Maya, I'm going to turn it to you to ask the last question. Before I do that, let me mention that in the chat, I'm going to share a link for a Google form where we'd like all of you to go to that form, answer a few questions. If you have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, you could put those in the form as well. But so that will appear in the chat in just a minute, and we're really looking forward to reading everyone's reflections and thoughts. And so I will be posting that. And Maya, you have the floor.
Okay, I was gonna ask, what is one of the most moving posters you've ever seen?
Well, I would say I'm going to pick one that changed world history, and you could look it up. It's the My Lai massacre poster, and the My Lai massacre was took place during the Vietnam War, and it was a massacre by U.S. soldiers Charlie Company of an unarmed village in Vietnam. And between 300 and 500 people were killed, all women and children with a few elderly men. They never found a gun. There was no shots fired. It was literally a massacre. The US government knew about it. The Vietnamese knew about it, but the US taxpayer didn't know about it. And it was over a year that it was hidden from the US taxpayers. And then an independent journalist named Seymour Hersh, who was the same guy who uncovered the Abu Ghraib. Probably you don't remember Abu Ghraib. These are things you probably should look up. He uncovered a photograph of the massacre, and some artists in New York made it into a poster. And it just showed these bodies, and the text was, "And babies?" And the answer was, "And babies." And that poster shocked the American people. Before that poster became, the photograph and then the poster became public, and this was in 1970, I believe, the majority of the people in this country believed the lies that the government was telling them about the war. We were fighting a good war. We were the good guys. We were fighting communism, and we were doing as good a war as good war could be. That photograph, and the poster kept it alive. The poster kept it. 50,000 copies of that poster were made, and people couldn't deny that this was being done in their name with their tax dollars. And they did not realize that their tax dollars were being used to massacre women and children. And that poster literally helped change people's consciousness, because it was horrific. And it's not the kind of thing you'd want on your wall, but people carried around in demonstrations, put it in offices. I mean, offices are more like school classrooms or dorms. And that literally, before that poster came out, and the story, obviously the photograph, the story was covered in the New York Times, the LA Times, Time Magazine, TV. The majority of this country supported the war. And after that poster kept before people's consciousness what the war really was. That was the turning point for this public support of the war. That literally started the conversation to end the war. So it's a powerful image. It's not one that is too easy to look at. It's easy to sign. If you go online and just type in My Lai Massacre, MYLAI poster, you'll see it and you'll hear the story. But that's certainly the most moving, in the sense of takes your breath away, but also had an impact internationally. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So,
I think we missed a question from Evans in the chat. From your research, what are the countries that have the highest levels of women's equality?
Oh, I'm not sure I could answer that question. That's a good question, and I should know the answer, but I'm afraid of making a mistake, so I'm not going to take a guess. It's also, it could be a question that would be, you could be fairly easy to Google that and to get an answer for that. I mean, everyone has, there's slightly different. There's pluses and there's minuses. So there's, there may be more women in the government in Scandinavia, but then there's the, I mean, I don't want to put myself, I want to expose myself on that one. I really can't answer that. Thank you for having me look up something before the next time. If anybody else has an answer.
I can offer a partial answer.
Okay.
It is definitely a great question. And I know right now, Mr. Norland, I don't want to confuse everybody with multiple links here. But Mr. Norland has just put in the chat. I'm going to answer that question, but first let me point out in the chat, there are 2 reflection forms. And there's one if you're a student, that's the one that we need you to fill out. And if you are not a student or not a La Jolla Country Day School student, perhaps you are a student of life, then we have a separate one for you to fill out. But now that everybody knows that those are there, I want to share with you, this was, because I feel like I had heard that question before, I'm going to share with you a link from NPR. And this is from 2016, of where it talks about how Rwanda leads the world with the share of women in the national legislature. But even though there are more women percentage-wise in the Rwandan national legislature than anywhere in the world, that has not necessarily translated to to full equality in the country. And it's a fascinating thing also because there were certainly a lot of women who were killed in the Rwandan genocide, but there were more, by percentage, more men who were killed in the Rwandan genocide. So that's part of the reason of why that's the case. But it's a very Googleable question, and you'll find a number of fascinating answers from different places around the world.
But you also need to consider what area they're talking about. As you mentioned, just legislative equality, or do they get child leave? Do they get who can take family leave? How much coverage do they get for family leave? Is it equal pay for equal work when they're doing this? So there's all kinds of levels of asking that question. Where is this? Which country gives equality and equity on many different areas?
And I can just add, we can also look to non-human models for how we can aspire. So this probably doesn't surprise some of you. I see Mr. Schulman laughing, but the bonobos are a great model of the human feminist movement, right? They behave with unrelated females as if they are their sisters. So they take the traditional solidarity that females have when they have kin relationships with each other, and they apply it to non-kin females. And so we can all learn a lot from bonobos as well. Well, it's just been so fascinating, Carol, to have you here with us today. We're so grateful for your time and for sharing your life's work with us. And maybe everybody could unmute and join us in thanking Carol and for being here with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.